But and then
we started.
hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society and the latest in the series of our talks and conversations with some of our recent award recipients. It's a real pleasure this evening to hand over to Joe McDonald, the RPS's awards manager, who will introduce our two speakers this evening. Joe, over to you.
Welcome to tonight's conversation. Anne McNeill has, for the past 3 decades, played a pivotal role in British photography as a curator, editor and writer. Pippa Oldfield is a photo historian, curator and senior lecturer in photography at Mima School of Arts and Creative Industries, Teesside University. After the conversation, Anne and Pippa will be taking questions, so please do write any you may have in chat. Over to you, Anne and Pippa.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Joe. It's really nice to be here tonight with everybody and to be talking with Anne.
Yeah, I second that. I'm really looking forward to our in conversation, Pippa. So thank you, RPS, for inviting us. When I got the invite to say, do you want to do an in conversation because you're the recipient of the Curators, this year's Curators Award, I could think of no one else I'd wanted to do it with rather than you, Pippa.
Oh,
the downside of that is we're so familiar with each other. I've had to put a post-it note on my computer saying, don't swear.
We'll try not to finish each other's sentences. We've worked together for the best part of 2 decades, haven't we? So,
yeah, so yes.
But I'm really looking forward to this because I'm still always finding out things about Anne's career and all the amazing projects that she's worked on. So should we start off, Anne, by sort of going back, I guess, to the beginning and talking about what first got you interested in photography? And there's probably a clue on this first slide.
So when I was about 6 or 7, I saw a TV programme about the Cottingley Ferries. And for those of you who don't know about the Cottingley Ferries, it was 2 little girls, Elsie and Frances, who in 1917 and for a couple of years took photographs of their ferries at the bottom of their garden. And it's called Cottingley Ferries because they lived in Cottingley. So I was fascinated by the story and I asked Santa Claus for a camera for my birthday. And I hope people can see this. This was my first ever camera. A Kodak 133X Instamatic. I would go down to the bottom of the garden and take pictures of the ferries. Of course, obviously there were no ferries there, but I swore blind that, you know, I could hear the ferries murmuring. The story has fascinated me. Like at the time, being 6 or 7, I didn't know it was about the veracity of photography, about what's a hoax, what's the truth. I just got hooked on photography. And then it gets even more geeky. I now live in Cottingley in the village, literally about 150 metres away from where Frances and Elsie grew up. So that was my introduction to photography.
Amazing. Are you still taking photographs at the bottom?
Yeah, of course I take pictures of ferries in my garden. No, I take pictures. If anyone follows me on Instagram, it's mostly pictures of my vegetables.
And when did you first realise that you wanted to be a curator? Where did that idea come from?
No, that was interesting because you sort of said that to me in passing a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh, I don't, you know, there's no such job when I was a curator, when I was, you know, at university or starting out in photography. And, you know, I looked up the etymology of the word curator and it's to care. And now everybody says they're a curator these days, which is fair enough, you know, but sometimes it's like, please don't curate your vegetables in the vegetable aisle. I did see that once. I think it might have been in Waitrose. But when you asked me that, I was like, oh yeah, with this camera, when I took my pictures, I would then put them in books and albums, I would label them, and then a few months later I would go back and rearrange the sequence and relabel them. So I guess there must have been something in me, but at the time I didn't know that's what a curator was.
That's so interesting. You were taking photos, but actually the bit that you really enjoyed,
yes,
what you did with those photographs and putting them together and maybe telling stories with them. And yeah,
totally giving the photographs context,
Yeah.
for people to enjoy, my poor family.
And did you train as a photographer initially? So at that point?
No, my first degree was sociology at Glasgow University, but I was always interested in photography, but I didn't think you could study photography. I didn't think you know, you could do a degree in photography. I didn't think you could even, like someone like me, could even have a career in photography. So I did sociology, and then, you know, after graduating, did a bit of traveling, did a few sort of practical photo courses at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and was completely hooked and thought, I really do want to become a photographer. So I moved to London in 83, 84 and started to volunteer at Camerawork. So yeah,
this is when I have to remember to
yes,
speak and change the slides. Okay, we're on.
So Camerawork was, you know, a radical gallery in the East End of London. It was a group of, you know, it was a collective of photographers who was interested in, you know, a leftist stand of photography. I guess it was called humanism photography, activist photography, what we nowadays probably call socially engaged photography. So I started there as a volunteer in the darkroom, just really dying to learn more about photography, more about how exhibitions got to put together, the whole process. Then after 6 months of volunteering, I got a job as a darkroom worker, which, you know, very left-wing and socialist. I was a worker through and through, and part of my job was to run workshops, women-only workshops, young people, children's workshops. But I chose these two slides just to show you, and just to show the audience, you know, that's where I sort of got my training, you know, and camera work was all about the politics of representation. And I think, you know, to this day, I think that's where I cut my teeth. I think that's where I have my sociology degree have given me a grounding into what I think, you know, the important parts of photography.
Yeah, and I think you've stayed really true to that. It's, you know, so interesting, like going through your career, and maybe it didn't actually feel like it was that connected at the time, but it's so apparent now looking at it.
No, nothing's connected at the time. You just do things, don't you?
So you were in London in the 80s, I imagine, was a really interesting time to be there. And what was it like sort of being in London at that point, and who did you meet? Was it an exciting time? Because
it was a really exciting time. So working in Camerawork, if you want to move on, sorry. You know, some of the, you know, Jo Spence was one of the founders of Camerawork. She's, you know, an activist, a photographer, a feminist. She, along with Rosie Martin, invented phototherapy. Here's some of Jo's work, Picture of Health. So I was really fortunate to meet Jo through my time at Camerawork. Also Rosie Martin, met her, but also there was a few of his collaboration between Jo and Rosie at that time. But there was a lot of us just starting out, and as I said, you know, I didn't have a career plan. I didn't plan it at that time. In about 85, 86, I met Joy Gregory, who at the time was working in, you know, community darkroom over in West London. Mark Seeley was sort of around, you know, the firebrand director of Autograph that he's now become. Anna Fox was a young student at Farnham who, sort of on the cusp of when I was leaving Camerawork, was getting a commission, her first commission, The Office. So again, you were just around all these amazing photographers and people who had opinions on photography. Looking back, it was such an amazing time. Yeah,
I have to say, I'm really envious. It does sound really amazing, and it was at that time as well, wasn't it, when there were so many questions about what photography did, what photography could be, how people could be represented, the Black British photography scene, the feminist photography scene. So yeah, I'm quite envious, Anne. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's now starting to be quite a lot of work looking back to that period and looking back to the kind of 80s and kind of radical community photography. It's starting to be studied, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is starting to be studied, and I'm glad it's been taken to be studied, so it's not going to exist in isolation. And it was, I really think all those points that you've just made up, you've just mentioned, has really shaped British, you know, British photography, along with, you know, the network of photographic galleries, you know, Cameraworks, Open Eye, Impressions. You know, there was about 10, 15 of them throughout the country, all looking at these really important points. Now, I'm not against academia. No, I think it's really great. And I think it's really great that now people are taking time to study this period. But I do have one little bugbear, because I've been at a couple of conferences and people stand up and done their paper, and you sort of think, that didn't really actually happen. You know, I was there. And it's not, and it's like, well, everybody's history is different, everybody's memory is different, and there's multiple histories. But my little appeal is, guys, if you're doing, you know, academic research and that really fertile period of British photography, ask those that were about, you know, interview us, because, not to be too blunt about it, we're not going to be around forever. We're still alive. Use us. Use us as a research.
Living history.
Yes,
You'll be inundated with requests to interview you, you know.
Oh, that's fine.
And this image here is one of the projects that you worked on, isn't it? From
Yes, so I think I mentioned at the beginning when I said I started out at Camerawork, you know, I ran workshops, sort of women's only groups, and one of the other workshops that I ran was a young girls group, and I use the word girl because they were like 10 to 14, 15. And it was, you know, now it's great. Everybody does that. You know, you get cameras, you get agency in the way you take pictures. But back then, you know, these were young girls who lived opposite Camerawork in the tower block. And I was able to teach them camera skills, you know, go into your house, photograph the domestic, photograph what's important to you, what do you see? And this got published in a magazine called Women in Photography. And the project was called Our House in the Middle of Our Street, which again is a popular cultural reference because, you know, madness were really big at that time. So yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, that was a project. I think again, that's the thing. I love working with people. I love like being an enabler. I love giving photographs context. So this probably came from, you know, my beginnings back here in the early mid-80s.
Yeah. And I think we'll come back to this as we go forward, because this comes up time and time again, I think, doesn't it? This kind of photography where you're collaborating with people.
Yeah.
So after this point, you became, I might have got this wrong, the photography development officer, is that right? At the Cross Channel Photographic Mission.
But before I did that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Before you did
that. I did an MA at Goldsmiths in photography. Between 86 and 87, 88, and it was about, again, my it was 25% dissertation, 75% practice. So my dissertation was analysing and deconstructing, you know, Band Aid, the big concert, and it was called Black Deaths, White Careers. And my practical work was, if people remember this, a tape slide piece, in which I built a 1950s room. It was an immersive piece. You had to walk into this 1950s room, and it was like discussing advertising and feminism. Yeah. So then after I left I joined the Cross Channel Photographic Mission as the photography development officer. So I moved from a worker to an officer. I'm going up in the world.
So tell us about why the Cross Channel Photographic Mission? Why did that come about?
So the Cross Channel Photographic Mission was a public funded commissioning agency based in the southeast of England. There was a partner one over in France in the North Pas de Calais. This was, as I said, the southeast of England, Kent, Sussex. And it was to commission photographers to observe, record and interpret people, places and issues in a period of a time of change. And that time of change was the building of the Channel Tunnel. So, you know, people think the tunnel's been around forever, but it hasn't. You know, it didn't open until 1994. So these two, you know, the Cross Channel Mission on this side was commissioning photographers to look at economic change, political change, social change. And this is the front cover of the book that when the commissions came to conclusion in May 94. You mentioned earlier about meeting people. Well, through this project, I met Bridget Lartimore, who's also become a lifelong friend, and she was one of the editors on this book. So in the English side, there were 11 photographers, 4 of them were women. On the French side, there were 14 photographers commissioned. They were all men. I think that's a talk for another day.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just thought, because I think it's fascinating, this period of photography, documenting the landscape, documenting change. And I just wanted to show some of the work from the commissions at that time. So this is Ken Baird, 1989, Dungeness. So this was at the time when they started to build, they were going to be building motorways to get to where the tunnel was going to be. And I just think, this typography is just fascinating, and how they're making man-made marks into the landscape. So that was Ken Baird's commission.
Yeah.
Another commission was Julian Germain, whose work was all about what was happening in the Garden of England. So I guess the apples here are a metaphor. And the next picture that Julian, from his commission, I just love this image, because I think it just works on so many levels. If you want to read this image, you can see it's looking outwards towards Europe. At the time, we were full of optimism and hope. We were going to be part of Europe physically for the first time in 2 millenniums. The boat's leaving, she's looking out. She's obviously works in an old tea shop somewhere on the south coast, wearing that uniform, and then the flag. And what I should maybe say about all of Julian's work that he did for the Cross Channel Photographic Mission was he framed it in frames that he sourced from charity shops in the region. So that was Julian. Quickly, this is just a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, I'm really struck by how relevant this project is now, and it's it's like 30 years, I guess, since this was commissioned, and that was a time 30 years ago, so 94, of such optimism and ideas of connecting people and of being part of Europe. And obviously we are in a very different situation now. But I love this work. I would love to see this exhibited again, actually. I think it's really resonant. Anyway.
I did too, but anyway, we'll have to go on this whistle-stop tour. This was a whistle-stop tour. And sorry, guys in the audience, it really is a whistle-stop tour, because this isn't like an illustrative lecture about Cross Channel Photographic Mission. What I'm trying to do here, well, actually, Joe said people in the audience love photographs, give them some photographs. So I'm giving the people in the audience what they want, plus also bringing up some pertinent points to back up what you've said, Pippa. So this Karen Knorr was one of the recipients of a commission. So this is Karen Knorr's work, The Virtues and the Delights, 1991 to 92. And Karen looked at the visual representation of common heritage of France and England. Another commission was Hugh Davis, Home from Home, and that was made between 1992 and 93, and it was about the Brits abroad, or English people who had moved from the south of England over to the Nord-Pas-de-Calais, attracted by you could get more property for your money. You're not meant to have favourites, like the same way you're not meant to have favourite children, but this really is my favourite commission from that.
That's a great imge, isn't it?
I love that image. So this
the
is
layers going on in there. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I could talk about this photograph for ages. The dolphin. So he's left England, but he's all the iconography is like England. Charles Dye, the standard thing, whatever that flag's called. And then he's got that French man, kind of like a caricature. Anyway,
we'll move on from that.
We'll move on for that. So another one that was another part of another commission was Anna Fox's The Village. And again, as I mentioned, I wanted to show like Karen and Anna, because the French side was just all men. And Anna's work was looking at a village in West Sussex, and it was like the rituals that went on there, and she tried to make sort of make it like fearful, or something's lurking behind. So she, Anna's known as like a colour documentarist, but part of the commission she did was like peering through hedges, over fences, to try and unravel what was going on in the village. Now, we move on to the 6th of May, 1994, and that's actually the day the Channel Tunnel opened. And this was my first project, I would say, that I ever did to commission photographers from scratch. And the idea was 3 photographers in the southeast, well, in Kent, 3 photographers in Nord-Pas-de-Calais region on the day the tunnel opened. So the point was that their brief was to look at from commonality to difference, and we wanted to look at what was typically English and what was typically French. So that's a little notebook, a little book that still exists. So that's quite interesting, yeah.
And then, so kind of coming out of the Cross Channel Photographic Mission, you sort of, when we were chatting earlier, you were saying that once the Channel Tunnel was opened, the sort of impetus and rationale for that had sort of, had gone, but there was a legacy to that project, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. Once, yeah, you're right, it was gone. There was the focus of the Channel Tunnel was open, what we were going to focus on now, and it was a period of what we're going to do. So one of the commissions was Ingrid Pollard. We all know Ingrid's work, who uses portraiture and landscape, to explore social constructs such as Britishness and racial differences. And she did this commission in Eastbourne, and it was like, yeah, that's interesting, but there was no rationale, no thread weaving its way through. So from out of that, it's another long story, but I founded Photoworks, and this is the commission agency that still exists till this day. And Photoworks, this is the first ever marketing that exists, and it was a little pamphlet printed in 1970. So Photoworks established in 1995, and this is summer 1996, and it's about crosses cultural and physical boundaries. Now so this is I wrote this down because I knew I wouldn't remember it. Photoworks' first ever remit was to commission new photography that examines issues of change and the perceptions individuals have of themselves and their neighbours. So that's kind of where we started. This is 95. I had, at the time, the first chair of Photoworks is the amazing John Gill, who I always credit as just being a brilliant mentor, and then in latter days a brilliant friend. And I'd met John in 93, 94 when he was the curator, exhibition organizer at the Royal Festival Hall in London, and he was going to show a selection of the Cross Channel Photographic Mission's commissions in May 94. We began to work together, and this was quite interesting. He was my first chair, I was the first founding director, and I'm convinced I came up with the name Photoworks, Commissioning Photography in Europe, and he's convinced he came up with it. And when we recently met in Brighton, we both decided that we should share that. But I actually did come up with it.
And of course, Photoworks still going strong, amazing organisation.
Great, absolutely great. Yeah.
So you were there for a few years, Anne, is that right?
A few years, just a couple of years, and then I actually got approached to actually got approached to be the artistic director of a year of photography called Photo 98, the UK Year of Photography and Electronic Image. And hold on, I just dropped my picture. So it was a year-long Arts Council funded, public funded year celebrating photography throughout the whole of Yorkshire and also parts of the UK. There was 130 plus partners, 400 plus artists, 310 projects and 101 commissions. And I've summed it all up in, in one photograph. But just to sum up one photograph, one important part of the year was what was called the European Commissions, and we commissioned 10 photographers to sort of look at the desire to understand our cultural identity, our society, and again our place in Europe. And this is a front cover from a Joy Gregory commission, Memory and Skin. So that's what we did. I think, well, you asked me recently again as well, when thinking what was the vision for the festival, and I was like, oh, I went away and I thought about it, and I found something that I wrote way back then, and I'd written creativity, excellence, innovation, and accessibility, and those are still things that I think are important and carry in my work today.
Absolutely, and that was a huge project to take on, Anne, doing something like that. An amazing success, but I imagine that you probably needed to lie down in a dark room for a long time after that.
More than a dark room for a long time. A year. Let's say I took a year sabbatical.
It's sabbatical.
But I think I took that project on because obviously I'm ambitious, but it was naivety. Honestly, if I know what I know, if I know now what I know then, and I keep trying to say to the wonderful people for Bradford 2025, because where I work now is in Bradford, and Bradford's going to be the UK City of Culture. I keep saying, pace yourselves, pace yourselves.
Yeah, it's a marathon. That's a marathon.
I just have that thing. It's a sprint, not a marathon. You know, it's a marathon after marathon after marathon. So head lying down in a dark room for a year.
Lying down in a dark room. So after you'd recuperated from that, you were appointed director of Impressions Gallery in York, and you obviously took to that because you're still going strong there, director after 23 years.
Was it that long?
It is that long. It's that long, yeah.
Marvelous. 20 of them, nearly 20 of them were with you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So kind of what impressions, what does impressions mean to you? Or I guess we're kind of showing here a few images of some of the exhibitions from before your time, aren't they, these ones?
Yeah, I think it was important we had a discussion about, impressions and what it means to me and you, to sort of acknowledge like where impressions came from and, the work it was doing in the late 80s, early 90s, and how it was like the forefront, how it was setting trends. And I like to say to photographers, don't follow trends, set trends. And I think I want to say, pay respect and say I'm an admirer of the work that the then director Paul Womble did, who went on to be the director of the Photographers Gallery, and the work that he did around race, class, really putting things out. So what I showing here is a poster from a show, Static Antibodies, curated by Sunil Gupta. This shows the work of Tessa Boffin. And at that time, it was the so-called AIDS crisis, and there was myths and scaremongering going on around it. And Impressions was the first gallery in the UK to put on an exhibition that challenged this. And it wasn't just the first photographic gallery, it was the first gallery. So that was really important. And then another thing I wanted to show about, Impressions was being at the vanguard and setting trends or setting, debates around photography. I go back to, I'll show you, an early work of Ingrid Pollard and her pastoral interlude, and again about her notion of Britishness and race. And, Ingrid has now gone on, and she was this year's one of the 4 for this year's Turner Prize. So I just think, Impressions has always had a great history that's attracted me and played an important role in the history of British photography.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's as you say, always had that reputation which you've massively built on in terms of being really brave and not shying away from. We always talk about not shying away from difficult subject matter, or it's making it accessible, making it something that can be talked about. And this is work by Trish Morrissey, who you commissioned in, I think it was 2004.
I know I commissioned Trish in 2002, and it was shown in Impressions in York in 2004. So, this is Trish Morrissey's seminal work, 7 years. And Trish uses photography to explore the link between performance, identity, and memory. 7 years is inspired by relationship expressed through the family albums, and 7 years presents a time from the past that is part fact, part fiction, and fantasy. And I think this is important because in all the years that I've, I think part of what I do at Impressions is work with new emerging photographers, really work with them over a long period of time on their first body of work, that cements their career. So 7 years is a really seminal body of work by Trish, and I'll go on and mention something about it further on in this discussion.
Because I think you've established some really good relationships with lots of photographers and other curators, and they kind of keep coming back, don't they, throughout your projects?
I hope so. I think collaborate. I mean, I think I got it starting off in starting off in partnership. Commissions are all partnerships. You can't commission unless you're working with a venue. And I think, again, throughout my career, I think collaborations and partnerships are really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So this takes us up to 2005, when you made a big decision, big bold decision, which was to close Impressions Gallery in York and move to Bradford, reopening in 2007 in what was it was the first specially designed bespoke photography building in the UK, wasn't it?
Yeah. Don't carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's the only relocation from one city to another that I'm aware of, a photography gallery. So I wonder if you could tell us how has that been, first of all, and you know, tell us about Impressions Gallery now.
Well, I'm going to cut a very long story short, apart from, well, you were there, you know the long story.
I know, yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, first and foremost, it was really important. Well, and I could not have done this without you. I really could not have done this without you. And our other colleague, Sarah Hill, who's now the Deputy Director at Impressions. You know, we had to do something and make a really bold, I'll use that word, decision to save Impressions. And first and foremost, I think we all were like, we need to save Impressions. It's about photography. It's not about York. Long story short, we moved over to Bradford. I remember someone saying at the time, quite high up in Arts Council, why are you doing that? That's professional suicide. But
Whoa.
I think yeah, I know, that's another story. So we moved, and as you said, it was the first time that a gallery had ever been built in the UK to show contemporary photography. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me, because all the other galleries have, you know, had taken over buildings to repurpose them, same as what Impressions had done in its 3 venues previously in York. So we opened on August 2007. Our opening show was Sharp's Wood by Lisa Drake-up, who's a Bradford born and bred photographer. And again, we all thought, you and I discussing this, it's really important. You know, we're coming to a new city. Why should people like welcome us? It's like, who are these people? This white cube coming from York, you know, and it's really important. And I still believe in that, you know, people at the heart of what Impressions does, building up local audiences. Yes, the national reputation is very important too, but so is our local audiences. So it was a curatorial decision or a curatorial reason for why we put that on. You know, we opened with a commission about Sharp's Wood. So Sharp's Wood's Sharp's Wood is a wood that exists on the outside of, just outside Bradford. I think you know, when people say, well, what does Impressions Gallery do? And it's like that horrible Americanism, the elevator pitch. And I now say that Impressions Gallery is a charity that helps people understand the world through photography and acts as an agent for change. So that's, I would sum that up in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah, very much about looking outwards and connecting.
Yeah. And this is just a nice little illustration of some of the publications you and I have worked on in the past. And I would say to photographers, you know, I know publications are expensive and I know distribution's hard, but you know, if you can, and crowdfunding seems to be working, you know, books are a great legacy. It's a legacy for your work, and it's a great way of getting your work disseminated beyond the gallery walls. So that's some of the ones that we've worked on. Yeah. And then I just thought the set, so the Lisa Drake-up was our first exhibition. Our second exhibition was a commission of Tessa Bunny, and this is Hand to Mouth, which is a documentation of the life of the nomadic shepherds in the Romanian Carpathian, I never can say it, mountains. And you know, it's interesting to know that Tessa's gone on and was this year's RPS recipient of an environmental award. So
So again, sort of supporting photographers at the beginning stages of their careers.
Yeah, and these are kind of, those 2 pictures are very much Tessa's kind of, recognizable visual language. But yeah, to reiterate what you've just said, Pippa, it's recognizing, and supporting photographers when they're starting out. So then moving from York to Bradford, we were able to change, well, not change, but expand our curatorial vision. It was the first time we were able to do retrospective or service shows, because we could make sense and make connections over someone's photographic career. So the first one that I curated was with Anna Fox, no, what was it called? Cockroach Diaries and Other Stories. And so this was, you know, Anna, you know, called the documentarist. Here's photograph from her exhibition Back to the Village, which was documenting rural events, and this one's the pram race. And then I do love the pram race.
Anna's someone that you met in London in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right, that's where that began. Yeah.
We've just finished working on a project, an HR funded project with the group of refugee women putting ourselves in the picture. It was a UK wide. It was brilliant. Brilliant, just brilliant working with Anna Fox. And this is, remember, if we go back to when I showed the black and white pictures from Anna's Cross Channel Photographic Commission. Well, this is like the colour work she did. You know, this is the village from that time, and it was shown as part of her retrospective. But the next picture, just briefly want to show, is Country Girls, which is a collaboration with Alison Goldfrapp, and it challenges overviews on rural life in England. I do want to say, and I've just remembered this, that Cockroach Diaries and Other Stories was one of the in 2010. In 2010, it was one of the 4 exhibitions in the Dr Award. Just remember that. But anyway, Country Girls was also in that exhibition, the survey show. And I'm going to do a wee advert for Anna. It's been launched next month in May as a book published by Satanta Books. So that's that. Going on to going back to like the front. So, you know, I worked with Trish in the early 1920s, and you and I then worked with Trish on this body of work, the front, where Trish is still using performance and identity and reenactment. And in this body of work, the front, she persuaded women in family groups, you know, she would go take their place, put on the clothes of the women and take the photograph. So she's still using performance, and it resonates with, you know, Trisha's memories of her child holidays by the seaside. And the reason why I showed this one is I'm currently working with Trish on, she's had an amazing retrospective of her work, Autofiction's 20 years of photography and film over in a museum in Finland. And we're working together trying to adapt that so that people in the UK can see the breadth and depth of Trisha's practice over 20 years. And it's a bit of a challenge going from like a show that's had 20 museum rooms into a one space adaptation of autofictions. But I think Trish is such an important artist and photographer that we're battling through those challenges, and that's going to open in early July at Impressions.
Brilliant. I think that'll be stunning. We'll expect a salon hang there, Anne. And then another retrospective that you worked on is that of Joy Gregory.
Which, yes, Joy Gregory, which is, you know, she's one of the most significant artists to emerge from the Black British photography movement of the late 1980s, 1990s, so which, you know, Autograph grew out of. And again, I think I did mention at the beginning, I first got to know Joy in the mid-80s when we were both working in community darkrooms. And her retrospective show, Lost Languages and Other Voices, again brought together a whole body of her work, and you could see the different approaches that Joy uses in her work. And this one's auto portrait from, I can't remember the date, sorry. And then another body of work was Cinderella Tours Europe. And I think it's a very complex body of work. And I think just for the point of this discussion and conversation tonight, you know, I'm going to say that these golden shoes act as a metaphor on the complex relationship between Europe and the Caribbean. And if anyone's interested, I would go on to Joy's website and see more of this work. Yeah. So that was how are we doing for time? Oh, we're all right.
All right, we're rattling through. I'm amazed.
We're okay. I'll take a breath now.
Take a deep breath. So this is quite a different approach. This is Murray Ballard, photographer that you work with very closely on his project, The Prospect of Immortality.
Yeah, so Murray was a student at Brighton University, and this was his first, and for his final degree show was he started a body of work called The Prospect of Immortality, and it's an amazing photographic insight into the practice of cryonics. And for those of you who don't know what cryonics is, it's the The process of freezing, if you want, yeah, the process of freezing a human body after death in the hope that science will bring the body back, you know, bring the person back to life in the future. And I got to know Murray's work when I was in Brighton one day, and he was showing as part of the Brighton Fringe, I think it was, and then we just got talking, and from that, I just thought this work's amazing. There's more to it, and again, from that first meeting to I think it was about 2 or 3 years later, Murray carried on making this work and got his first solo show in Impressions. That's and so what again, thinking about our in discussion, and that got me to start to remember Murray wrote a really lovely essay about being curated for the first time. That was in Shirley Reid's book about, you know, putting together an exhibition, practical guides. And I did think, oh, I could read out all the really nice things Murray said about me, but I thought I would just, and I've lost it. I found it again. I thought, you know, for people who are, you know, photographers in this evening, I just want to say, you know, because people often ask, you know, what's a curator? Even my mum didn't know, but anyway, so I just want to read out for people who are thinking about working with a curator and what does a curator bring to the party. So Murray wrote, I've come to the conclusion that the greatest asset a photographer could have is the ability to see your own work with fresh eyes, as if you're viewing it for the first time. That I now know is the role of the curator. It's almost impossible for the photographer to retain the necessary distance from their work. And as a curator, Pippa, what do you think of that statement?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that 100%. I just don't, it must be so difficult, I think, to have that understanding. And I think curators act as that bridge between a photographer and an audience. It's an amazingly privileged position to be in. It's great.
And go back to its original roots, to care.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's Murray. And then another one, again, Paul Rees was another sort of survey show examining, you know, 30 years of his work. And Paul Rees, people, you know him as, you know, a significant colour documentary photographer. He's a Bradford lad. You know, his work showed Daydreaming About the Good Times, which was on the post office screen in the first. And that picture just there was the title of the exhibition, and that exhibition, you know, was examining, you know, 30 years from Thatcher's Britain through to the then recession of the time. And this one, you know, Paul's work looks at themes of class, consumption, you know, things that I've always been interested in. It's very political work, again, going back to what, you know, the politics of representation that I've said at the beginning. And this is, you know, Paul's iconic, you know, photograph from the series I Can Help in 1988. And again, the same as I could talk about Hugh's picture, you and I could talk about this for a whole hour. Just
probably could. We probably shouldn't, but it's an amazing image. I love that image.
Yeah, I love it too. But yeah, well, we could.
and the story afterwards. But anyway, no, we'll
anyway, photo chats with Pippa and Anne.
Save that for another time.
Yeah.
So tell us about this. So this is work by Sid Shelton, isn't it, from an exhibition?
Yes. So two reasons why I wanted to, well, quite a few reasons. So the work that I've showed, like, was a selection of what shows that I commissioned or curated at Impressions. And I've mentioned throughout this talk, you know, collaboration's important, partners are important. I think also you and I know as being like the two curators at that time, Impressions, it's a bit boring for the audience if it was just always our curatorial vision, our curatorial voice. Plus, we don't know everything. Plus, you know, for the audience, it'd be great to get different takes on photography. And so over the years, we've both worked, you know, quite closely with Autograph. So this was a touring exhibition from Autograph. And it's Sid Sheldon's work, which is about Rock Against Racism. And Rock Against Racism, you know, existed from 1976 to 1981. So when I was growing up and finding about music and punk, and it captured a pivotal moment in British politics, culture, fashion, and music. So it was at the time of my youth. And I included this one because it's very personal to me, because you guys, my brilliant team, sounds like I own you, the team at Impressions for my 60th birthday bought me this original print, and it's just so dear to my heart for many, many reasons. And also my 60th was during lockdown, so it kind of connected me back with you guys.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then another one talking, if again, having worked in Camerawork and having worked with in other community darkrooms in the East End, you know, I thought this one was this one's important, you know, about politics. There still is a lot of racism and stuff happening, and it's terrible. And this was happening in the, you know, Brick Lane in London. So again, this is another one of Sid's photographs that were in Rock Against Racism. So again, going on to, and I just thought that other thing is, you know, it's important to know that you don't know everything, you can't know everything, and to, you know, hand over curatorial control or whatever to other people. And again, this is another autograph one, and it was really important for me and you to show at impressions, because as we know, Bradford is, you know, but you know, has a high, the demographic is a high sort of, you know, South Asian descent or South Asian immigrants, plus it's one of the youngest, it is the youngest growing cities for youth in the UK. So this was and what do you and I know about, you know, young Asian males? So this was another autograph commission by Mahtab Hussain called You Get Me, and it centres on the experiences of young working class Asian men in contemporary Britain. And I also think that when you run a gallery, you know, you have to be mindful of your locality. You have to know where you're placed. So it's really important. It's really important that, you know, people think that they can go into a gallery space and see, you know, themselves reflected back on them. So I think that's what, hopefully that's what You Get Me did.
Absolutely. We're coming to the last exhibition now. So this, and I think we've just about made it on time.
Oh, that's amazing.
So this is a recent exhibition called In Which Language Do We Dream?
Yes, so this exhibition started in 2019, 2018. In Which Language Do You Dream? And it's a co-production between documentary photographer Rich Wiles and a Syrian family, the Al-Hudaways, and in particular Ruba Al-Hudawi. And I think this is really, really important. Like, it sort of started with discussions with Rich, and he was working with, you know, a Syrian family that had recently been relocated to the UK. And through just him and I talking, it became really clear really quickly, you can't, you know, there has to be an agency here. The family has to have, you know, an equal voice, whatever that is. So Rich was fortunate enough to get an Arts Council grant to work with Ruba, teaching Ruba photographic skills. Now, Ruba, when she had lived in Homs in Syria, had worked in a photo lab, so there was sort of a connection. And you know, Rich and Ruba, you know, they both treated it as a job. They both got paid, you know, a wage to do this. It got really, really, really hard, because then, as we know, March 2020 came along, and we all know what happened. So it got hard for Rich to collaborate with Ruba. It got hard for Ruba, you know, it was just quite, we all had to overcome lots of different adversities, but we did, and the work carried on being made. And again, when the work was eventually shown at Impressions, you know, we all made a decision not to say who the photographs were by, not to go, this is Rich, this is Ruba's. It was, you know, it's really like trying to think about how is collaborating, how can you co-author something. And so that's what In Which Language Do We Do hopefully achieve that. Now, the other thing I'd like to say was, I think I mentioned about books, and it's a good way for photographers to get books out in the world and beyond the gallery wall. But something that I've recently introduced at Impressions is that, you know, if you don't have books, newspapers are a good way to disseminate the ideas and to get the photographs out there and circulated down different communities. Like this newspaper, like, not only can you buy it in the gallery for a donation for £2, it also got distributed to every library in the Bradford districts. And this newspaper is like, it's solely the work of Ruba and her children, Mustafa, Yasan, and Hanan. So that's that. And I think
Great image. I love that cover.
I love that. Yeah, that was taken by Ruba. So this one, you know, I keep saying people are important, collaboration's important, people at the heart of what Impressions does. And I just put this one in just as a fun thing for me to end the photographs on. So when the day that coming out of all the lockdowns, we finally, we were still, people were able to come into the gallery. It was really, really emotional day for me, having never met people over screens. Ruba's there in the middle in the pink with the mask, and this is like Ruba's family and Rich Wilds' family, who's there, and all their friends, and the Ruba had said to the children, you're going to a gallery, you have to be quiet. And as soon as they came in, they were walking around going, shh, shh. And I was like, don't be daft, make as much noise as you want. So it's pretending to say shush. And the one thing I want to say about why it's not just like, we're meeting people for the first time, but it was that photographs are important. Photographs, don't know if you can say can change lives. I think they do, but the photograph's ability to communicate is incredible. And what happened here was some of Ruba's family are still in Syria, or they're scattered in Germany, in different countries. The pandemic had been, they couldn't meet, they couldn't travel, and Ruba walked around with her WhatsApp, videoing every single photograph, talking to her family and explaining it. And I just thought, that's why I do photography. That's what it's about. Communication. People.
That's a beautiful kind of example to end on there, Anne.
Oh,
and kind of brings together all of those strands, I think, of the work that you've done, and going back to the kind of cross channel photographic mission that I think it was crossing borders and
making connections.
Making connections, and it's been really wonderful having this conversation with you. I think we should end it here, because it would be really great to leave time for some audience questions. But I just want to say thank you so much, Anne, for that, and huge congratulations on your award, which is so well deserved. And I just really admire your enthusiasm, your bravery. You're such an inspiring figure in photography. It's been a huge pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Pippa, and vice versa back to you.
Right, we'll stop the loving now and move
okay.
on.
Bring on the questions.
Thanks, excuse me. Thanks so much, Anne and Pippa, for that. And it's nice to hear so much laughter between you both as well. It's it really lifts everything, and you clearly have a wonderful working relationship, and I'm sure friendship as well. So that's great. We've got some questions that have come in already. And the first one is asking about the Channel Mission project and where that work is now.
Oh, crikey. Some of it's in a storeroom, I think, in Kent County Council's storeroom, I think. Some of it went back to the photographers. Some of it's dispersed. I think Photoworks would probably know better, but it's problematic. I do know that. But again, through no one's fault. It's just like back in those days, you did commissions. Then the work either went back to photographers or it went into someone's storeroom. I mean, that sounds totally unprofessional, but you know what I'm kind of saying, Michael.
Yeah, well, I guess what you're saying there is that it wasn't. You weren't thinking, oh, in 30 years' time, people are going to be really interested in this.
Yeah, I guess it's like people are interested now, but then now again, hindsight's wonderful. It's like, and I think we've all learned that lesson. I think you, me, Pippa, Michael come from a similar time scale. Well, yeah, the Royal Photographic Society have been doing that for day one, but now it's really important to archive work and to give it context. I've definitely learned that since then.
We've got a really interesting question from Sarah Dow, who's asking, Anne, do you think there is a line between documentary and contemporary photography? And if so, where do you see it? If not, how do you define creative work in the context of photography that tries to capture the zeitgeist that lives on the edge, as you say, at the vanguard?
That's a question for Pippa.
Oh.
Pippa, so do I see a line between documentary and contemporary? I don't think it depends. No, I don't think it is. Each it's how the photographer defines the work or how we decide to give it context. What's, if I've got this right, what's contemporary? And I think that they're interchangeable. I think it's fluid. It just depends on the subject matter. What was the second part? Sorry.
And if not, how do you define creative work in the context of photography that tries to capture the zeitgeist, as you say, at the vanguard?
Well, that could be documentary. That could, I mean, like if you take, say, example of just because I showed the photographs, you could say that Anna Fox is a documentary photographer, but she, you know, is capturing the zeitgeist or contemporary photography. Maybe you would never describe Trish Morrissey as a documentary photographer, but she's sort of at the vanguard of her. And there's many, many approaches to photographic practices, and each is valid, I think. You know, each has, there's room for all different approaches to photography.
And I'm going to take Sarah's next question because it's really interesting, and then I'll pick up on the final two. So Sarah again is asking another one for you, Anne. How do you define the curatorial voice? You've mentioned it a couple of times in your discussion with Pippa.
So for me, curatorial voice is like what you're interested in, what motivates you. So as I sort of touched on, you know, I like, you know, representation. I'm interested in gender. I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in identity. And again, that's just a brush stroke. And underneath that is different nuances. So if you sort of said, you know, kind of show that Anne McNeill does, it's that. Then another curatorial voice is, I tend to, I did something recently and I had to look back at some of the shows that I'd curated in the space in Bradford, and I had an absolute revelation. I was like, oh shit, oh God, I'm so sorry. I was like, oh good grief. I tend to hang a show a certain way. I tend to put contextual material in vitrines in a certain way. I tend to use this similar frames, similar pacing, and then I was like, well, no, you know the space really well, so that's my curatorial voice. So I've tried to, since I had that revelations, I've tried to break away from always presenting it unglazed and white frames with a salon hang. So I think a curatorial voice is your vision, your interests. Pippa, what do you think a curatorial voice is?
I think it's really interesting that you know, when I was first starting out, like there weren't curating wasn't something that was a word that was you were familiar with, and they weren't curating master's courses either. And I think it's interesting now that, because I teach on the MA curating at Teesside University, that's something that students would think about at the very beginning of their careers, is what their curatorial voice might be. And for me, it's something that I feel like has developed very organically over the years, and maybe a bit like Anne, where those different strands come together. And for me, it's doing a lot of work on war and conflict, as well as issues of gender, and maybe some of the kind of approaches that I take as well. So I think we all have our different strengths and signature styles.
I think that's a good one. That's what I was trying to call my white unglazed photographs.
I think that's great, and as you say, that's you know, something that we have our specialisms, and obviously work with other people that have different specialisms as well. Yeah,
and that's why it's good to bring in people's different interests. Yeah.
So we just got two final questions now. The first one is asking Anne about what 2025 in the Bradford City of Culture holds for Impressions Gallery and for your own projects, Anne, if you can tell us anything.
I've been sworn to confidentiality by Shanaz Gulzar, the creative director for UK City Culture. I'm dying to tell everyone, but you know, they've got some aggressive marketing on. They've got the big boys marketing company from London, and we're under strict instructions when programs are going, you know, when we can release programs. But what I can say is we're going to do a really large public art program throughout the whole of the Bradford districts with portraits. And the other thing that I'm really, really genuinely happy to announce, we're going to be doing a big commissioning program with a pan-UK program with our friends and partners at Street Level in Glasgow, Photo Gallery in Cardiff, and Belfast Exposed in Belfast. And so we've been having online chats at the moment, and it's like, it's going to be big, it's going to be bold, and it's going to be ambitious. And I might even have NASA on board as one of the partners.
Wow. Okay, that promises a lot. I mean, we'll watch out for that. And then just finally, can you just tell us a few of the photographers today that you admire?
Oh, Right now, I have gone completely blank.
I'm gonna jump in here and say Mariam Wahid, because I know we're both huge
Yes.
admirers of her work. And I believe that they're opening the exhibition quite soon.
I believe so. Mariam Wahid, I really do admire. A young photographer from Birmingham, looks at British Muslim identity. The exhibition Sebanissa, which is all about her mother. Her mother came from Pakistan 20 odd years ago for an arranged marriage in Birmingham, and again in 2019, Mariam went back to Lahore with her mother, and she made a whole body of work called Sebanissa, which was her mother's name when she lived in Pakistan. And we opened that a couple of weeks ago, but the celebration event is happening on Friday because it was Eid when we opened it, and it, you know, you've got, just be disrespectful to have a, an exhibition celebration when, you know, half the audience are fasting, so, you know, being mindful of people's cultural beliefs. So that's opening. So yeah, Mariam Wahid's definitely one to watch. Plus she's one of the nicest women in photography.
Great.
Which always helps.
It does, and I think well, I think we can say the same to both you Anne, and Pippa as well. It's been really interesting hearing you have discussed your career, Anne, and Pippa. Thank you so much for bringing some of that to life as well. And on behalf of the Royal Photographic Society, congratulations on your award. It's well deserved, and we've clearly got a lot more to see from you over the next few years. And Pippa, thank you again for your part in this evening's talk. And Joe, the RPS Awards Manager, thank you so much for arranging this evening and for bringing two great speakers together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the audience as well for your questions and for attending the event this evening. And look out for future events from RPS Award recipients over the next few weeks and months. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.